Welcome back to this series documenting my work on a turn-based combat system for a Murder Drones fan game. For this devlog I wanted to share the vision I had for what this game is meant to look like, because well, it's been 4 weeks, and you still couldn't tell that this is a Murder Drones fan project if it wasn't plastered on the thumbnail and in the title. And it will have to wait another week, because I ran into issues when trying to achieve it. But before I get into things that caused problems, one thing that I did succeed on was finishing the basic camera controls, including making the sprites billboard properly. I might try implementing a more advanced camera controller to more closely recreate the fight scenes, but for regular gameplay this should be sufficient. And with that done, the most important thing to figure out was the character sprites. In Cardinal Quest, every unit has just a single sprite, and the only thing that changes is the facing direction between left and right. Plus the player character also gets a sprite matching the weapon type equipped. And those two things I already replicated, but for this project I wanted to do more. I had this idea of enemies visibly winding up attacks, of status conditions changing the character's pose. In particular, I had in mind the image of Uzi losing balance when being shot at by Jay in the pilot, which I would most likely use for the off-balance status. The way it would probably work is that certain triggers could be responsible for changing the pose. Getting afflicted with a status condition like off balance or prone would definitely be a part of it. Then the player character would change poses based on the last action performed, so mostly follow-throughs of attacks and such, while other units would instead change poses based on the next action that they are going to perform. So this way you can learn your enemies and use that knowledge tactically. Additionally, the sprites should be modular. The health items would have their own sprite on top of the character, of course, but also things like the image on the visor changing, wings extending and retracting, and of course dismemberment would be also possible with the fully modular system. Though all that of course means that each character needs a sizable bank of sprites, either full poses or pieces that could be put together, sticking with the pixel art style because I don't feel like I can make any art style look genuinely good, but pixel art is easiest to make acceptable. At least when you are left-handed and your only digital drawing tool is a mouse that you learn to use with the right hand. And I decided to base the sprites on screenshots from the show, because even in pixel art I don't have the skill to draw them from scratch, especially when there isn't much in terms of low-resolution Murder Drones pixel art to draw inspiration from. And to that end I tried a lot of methods, which was what took up most of the week, and only one worked decently well. As in, it allowed me to make an acceptable sprite in a short enough time to not have an opportunity to get discouraged and start looking for a different method. After all, if it would take me even just an hour for a single sprite, this project would never be finished. The method that I eventually settled on is to simply paint over the screenshot, flattening the colors to a bare minimum, then scaling the result down to the target resolution with no interpolation. The resulting sprites are by no means finished. I will need to get a consistent color palette, which, thinking about it, I might derive from the official images of the merge. Some detail will also be needed, particularly when it comes to hair, but as they are good enough to use for programmer art to make the project actually look the part of a Murder Drones fan game. And they do have a certain charm to them. The T-pose Uzi at least makes me think of an early 3D render, although before I create too many of them, I'll have to resolve the potential issue of size. Look at this. This is Uzi at 62 pixels tall. At this size there is just barely enough space on her visor to have some facial expressions. But as you probably noticed watching the show, Uzi is tiny, so I'll have to either make her smaller, with a proportionally larger head, which is what you would typically do in a pixel art, particularly in RPG sprites, or scale other characters based on Uzi being roughly 64 pixels tall, which would put N for instance at around 80 pixels tall. I'm definitely leaning towards the latter. Sticking to 64 by 64 could make it easier to find tiles to use to texture the environments, as they most often come in the power of two sizes, so 16 by 16, 32 by 32, 64 by 64 and so on. But if I were to make the tiles in my game 96 by 96, I could create meta tiles out of 32 by 32 ones, so it should be fine. Meta tiles, in case you don't know, are just tiles that are constructed out of smaller tiles. It's a technique that was used quite a lot in older console games to minimize the cartridge space taken up by levels and sprites. For instance, I encountered it when working on my Fire Emblem ROM hack, which is built on Fire Emblem 8, a Game Boy Advance game. But that is what I've got for this week. I didn't finish the items and I didn't implement dismemberment yet, but that is mainly because both of these systems will want to interact with sprites and poses to some degree. So that's what I'll most likely be focusing on in the next devlog in 2 weeks. Until then, farewell.